everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams Deep podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today, we're coming at you with two new reviews. We're going to be talking about two new releases, one of which is the album from Wild Pink, indie rock band, heartland rock band Wild Pink. The new album, ILYSM.
I love you so much.
I love you so much.
Aww.
And we're also having a bit of a podcast coming home moment. We're covering one of the bands that we first covered on this podcast. Full circle, baby. We're going to be talking about the newest release from the 1975. We're going to be talking about being funny in a foreign language. But hey, we got all four people back this week to talk about that record. Gonna be some good stuff this week. On the channel, we uploaded our most recent episode in the National Retrospective, where we talk about Trouble Will Find Me, which is one of my personal favorite national records. We had our returning guest Mika join Ryley and myself talking about that. Go check that out if you haven't. We also have a record club from Morgan, his recommended record, which is the Tragically Hip's Fully Completely. Is that what it's called? I don't remember things, but that's the album. Please go watch that. That is an underrated album from an underrated band. Don't sleep on it. Damn it, you fucking
And so far, it's an underrated video.
Hips. It's a half hour, you fucking bums.
I don't know if I agree with this tactic of insulting people into watching our videos.
I'll do it. That's my turncoat, is that I'm turning from the friendly member of this podcast to the most aggro. That's my arc.
You also couldn't remember the name of the album for a second there.
Nope.
So you really
it's because I have amnesia. This is well documented. Are you making fun of my disability, Ryley?
Yes. Anyway, let's move into, as we typically do, our first segment of the episode, which is what we have been listening to in the last 7 days. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I guess the biggest thing I've been listening to that has dominated my week is the music of acclaimed Japanese composer Susumu Hirawasawa. I have offhandedly mentioned him before, just being a fan of his compositions. Most people probably know him for his work either with the 1997 anime version of Berserk, or you know him from his work with acclaimed Japanese director Satoshi Kon, because he did the music for his show Paranoia Agent, he did music for Millennium Actress, and he did music for Paprika, my two favorite Satoshi Kon movies. So naturally, I have been a fan of this man for a very long time, and I listened to some of those again just because it got me feeling in the spirit. And if you haven't listened to those or seen any of those projects that they are attached to, familiarize yourself. That's some of the greatest art you'll ever fucking witness, frankly. But thing is about this dude is that he's got his own very, very well regarded and respected catalog of solo music that he's just made. He is like a really well-known sort of art pop, new age progressive electronic musician. And I was just like, I really need to give one of those albums a listen one of these days. So I started off with one of his earlier, more acclaimed works, 1994's album Aurora, which is sort of his first significant work, which is a really good album, but it sort of feels like it needs to be tightened up a little bit. And lo and behold, the very next year, he would do just that with his album Sim City. No relation to the game. It's just called Sim City. And as Ryley has been eager to point out in the chat this week, it features a woman T-posing on the front of it. And I welcome Mr. Hirawasawa to the newly christened Jake Cannon Club, because Sim City is fucking amazing. This is like... This is as close to like indescribable as music can get, frankly. I think I described it earlier in the chat this week as being like if Arca and Daniel Lanois produced post-era Björk. I've also seen a lot of people, I don't have a reference point for this specifically, but if this helps anyone in terms of gauging whether or not they're interested, is that Hirawasawa, both in voice and in music, is very frequently compared to the music of Sparks. So if that's something that you're into or interested in, this is probably something that you will be into as well. And SimCity is just, it is a marvel that this came out in the mid 90s, because this album sounds amazing. The whole thing is just this loud progressive electronic / kind of art pop synth pop thing. It's like he took the blueprint of Yellow Magic Orchestra and just made it all sound as big as humanly possible. Some of the hooks on here are just positively irresistible. Hirawasawa's voice is gorgeous. Dude is 70, still making good music and still performing incredibly well. I don't know how he's maintained his creative verve this long, but back here, it's absolutely sensational. There are parts of this album that reminded me of like bits of everything in terms of like progressive pop, and even sometimes the vocals kind of veer into the sort of Jonathan Higgsian kind of stuff. I'm never like I physically, if I tried to forget the hooks on songs like Archetype Engine or Caravan, I couldn't, just because they're so great. They're fucking whack ass songs on here like Colony, which are like, even by this own album standards, positively bewildering. And something I noticed about both Aurora and this is that I don't know if it's like just technically reworked versions of songs, but there are certainly like elements you can listen to in these songs that you can hear later on stuff like the Berserk soundtrack. Like, for example, the song Kingdom on SimCity has bits of it that are worked into Guts's theme, I think. And I was listening to parts of it and I was like, oh, he must have like done some fucking wizardry for that shit. But again, if you're into his work with that kind of stuff, it's basically just that kind of shit. And it's wonderful. He has so many other great albums that I'm really, really looking forward to visiting. He has a huge catalog of stuff, really prolific dude. Maybe forget the fact that he's had some interesting opinions on the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe forget about that for a little bit.
No, you're gonna come
Well,
on here and we're not gonna cancel Susumu Hirawasawa, are we?
Trust me, it's already happened, judging by Rate Your Music. But his ability to make good music is not diminished, and he's a trans ally, so maybe it balances out here in the end.
You know, I feel there's like a spiritual disconnect with this information. Now that I know this, now that I know like the guy who did the Berserk soundtrack, he's like, coronavirus doesn't exist. I don't know. It somehow changes my relationship with that show.
I feel bad
yes,
for you.
I agree with this statement. And I can only co-sign August's take here. And Berserk fan no longer.
Yeah. That's exactly.
You might want to cover up your fucking brand tattoo for the rest of your life. That notwithstanding, some wonderful music that I think most of my friends would enjoy at least a little bit. It is like being transported into a world 200 years in the future. It's like watching fucking Metropolis, but like the anime Metropolis that got made by the dude who made Akira. It's like dope shit. And apparently I'm just really, really down to fuck with Japanese art pop as of late, because I also listened to an album that's been on my to listen to list for a while called Fushigi by an artist named Akina Nakamori. And this is interesting because this is very much like late 80s sort of like dance pop stuff, but it has a whole lot more interesting influences going into it. I think the most common sort of cited comparison for me while I was listening to it is that it sounded like the really more guitar driven pop of something like The Cure. This has some tags in it like ethereal wave, for example. So there are parts of this album that sound a bit like Cocteau Twins or Lycia, for example, but it really never takes away from the fact that front and center, Miss Nakamori is a fantastic vocalist who's a wonderful performer. This is a really unique, very atmospheric kind of art pop album, but it's still also just like really fucking bangs too. And again, it's one of those albums that, you know, it came out in the 80s, but you couldn't tell from the sound of it. I mean, it draws from a lot of people who were probably, you know, contemporaries back then, but it sounds so great just in terms of like the overall like just quality of the production. There's some kind of synth tones that feel just a tiny itty bitty bit dated, but that's, you know, par for course with this kind of stuff. I really enjoyed this. Want to see if maybe some other albums of hers really click with me, just because I found this to be quite compelling, quite fun, interesting little listen. One thing I did at, I think, the either end of last year, beginning of this year, is that I like right when we were doing a bunch of podcast stuff that didn't have to do with new releases, I usually take time like that to just go through my back catalog of favorite artists and stuff. And one of them I did earlier this year was David Bowie. I remember talking about shit like Scary Monsters and Super Creeps earlier, which I know is a beloved record by many of my podcast mates and our friends. But that was spurred on by the fact that I initially listened to Heroes for the first time in years then, and I was just like, you know, I've always been kind of like, yeah, this is really good, but it's probably mid-tier Bowie. And then I listened to it and I was like, this might be his best album actually, while I probably still wouldn't put it above The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust. I mean, it's as good. It's as good. I guess my only hot take in relation to that in terms of Bowie are that, like, I love Low, but I think that Heroes is just the better album. I think the ambient side of Heroes is superior to the ambient side of Low, which is probably my preferred version of that record. And also the ending of The Secret Life of Arabia just comes in and fucking wallops you. That's just an album where it kind of feels like everything that you love about an artist like David Bowie is just fucking crammed into there by brute force. You have the sort of quintessential experimentation of that second half, the work he did with Brian Eno and shit. Like it has that sort of post-rocky stuff in shit like Moss Garden, which is one of my favorite pieces of music that either of those men ever made. And, you know, it also has the weird ass, like, station to station-esque post-punk that's on there, and songs like Joe the Lion and Beauty and the Beast. And Beauty and the Beast is what a fucking tune. That is a song that simply does not get its due. More Bowie fans need to rep that song as being flawless. I would be lying though if I said my favorite song on the album was not Heroes, just because, I mean, like, that's an undeniable song. That is a basic fucking take, but sorry, it is simply one of the maybe 10 greatest songs ever written. Another thing I listened to sort of left of the dial is I listened to an album by a black metal band. I think they're a Chechen black metal band called Cult of Fire. And this album that I listened to, I had to look it up because it's in like another language most places, and it translates to Aesthetic Meditations of Death. And I listened to this because A, it was bolded at the time when I found it, and B, it was just the album cover of it is dope as shit, just looks cool as fuck. And I listened to it, and this is fascinating. I can't really speak as to whether or not, like, there's sort of, like, this is basically a band that's leaning into, like, Hindu spiritual music and fusing it with black metal. And I don't know if maybe that's, like, weirdly culturally appropriative in, like, a not cool way, just because they do kind of, like, aesthetically, it does feel kind of skin deep in terms of, like, its utilizations of A, a different language, and B, different instruments. But that said, it creates a really unique, really cool experience. Like, you know, how often do you hear black metal with like sitars in it? It would be like the Hindu version of Panopticon. If I had to compare it in a certain way, the vocal performances on here are appropriately fiery. This is just a brutal album that has some, if nothing else, if like the different instrumental textures of just adding a different sort of culture's tonalities to your music doesn't do it for you. Listen to it for the drumming, which is just fucking spectacular. There's nothing I love more than a good black metal album that knows how to kick your ass with a good rhythm section. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is I listened to the new EP from Liturgy, another sort of band that I associate with the foundations of this podcast, being that like that's when, you know, the people who are into Liturgy sort of got into it because of Zach and Ryley, and then we did our episode on the artwork. So all of those albums I associate with the beginning of the podcast, and we covered the most recent Liturgy album. But apparently this is an EP that is a split up version of just one song that's going to appear on the new Liturgy album at the beginning of next year. And
Yeah,
first of all, good indication as to its quality is that if you didn't tell me that, I wouldn't have guessed, just because this feels just like a really cool, cohesive EP. But I think the cool thing about Liturgy is that that's a band where literally every single release, I had no idea what the album was going to sound like before I listened to it. And after it, I was like, yeah, there's no way I could have possibly predicted this is what it sounds like. And this is Liturgy doing weird fucking atmospheric sludge metal shit. This is Liturgy doing Neurosis, and it fucks so incredibly hard. The final segment of this, like the final track on here, is like early Animal Collective psychedelic folk shit too. Wild ass combination. It has only made me more hyped to see what this album is going to end up being. It feels like if you were really on board with HAQQ, this is probably an album for you. Feels like maybe we might be getting down to the heavier side of the foundations of Liturgy once again, rather than the like weird opulent shit that they did on the last record. So I'm excited for whatever this turns out to be. Hell, maybe the rest of the record's nothing fucking like it, but that is the joy of being a Liturgy fan, is that you just don't have any fucking clue.
I can say that the new album, which is this track, which is in its completed form titled 93696, even though the EP has a different title, it's the title track on their upcoming album, which is coming out on the 24th of March next year. And, you know, Morgan, brace yourself. The album's going to be 82 minutes long.
Wow!
You know what? I'm not doing that. We don't need to do this again.
Well, looks like it's gonna be a fucking opus. Like there's just, yeah, it's gonna be a fucking.
Based on what I heard from this EP, if the album sounds like that, you will more or less dig it a little bit. Like it won't be like the last album where you were just like, I don't fucking
It's very convenient of her to just, you know, put our ratings all in the title just so we can skip the whole episode.
Yeah.
August, now that you're back, what have you been listening to recently that you want
one thing I listened to was Heaven or Las Vegas by the Cocteau Twins. Very pretty sounding album. It's crazy this came out in the 90s, like the production.
Isn't it?
And it's I mean, not even really the 90s, basically the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And this sounds immaculate. I mean, it's really a crime how good this sounds. I mean, I think the guitars are definitely a highlight here. I mean, I don't know. I'm talking to you about dream pop. This is like George Bush talking about defending a country well. I mean, it's out of my wheelhouse. What I can say is that even though this was something that doesn't typically fall within my aesthetic interests, I did get a lot out of it. I think the atmosphere on here is very good. Some of the, I guess, more pop-oriented cuts on here sound are really addictive. But another thing I listened to that was usually not a style I particularly care for was a funk metal album, but better than the shit ass Red Hot Chili Peppers. We're talking about Living Color.
Streets and bounds ahead of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
If you don't know what it means, your street's behind.
Yeah.
That was a community reference. I'm glad that hit for everybody.
We're all proud of you. Living Colors Vivid is a really good album. What's so fun about this is like, this is an album made by people who were obviously not super cognizant of the kind of album structure, just because you start with this, you know, really heavy, and I should say this is kind of due to the product of a lot of the singles being placed more front and center in the record. Obviously with it opening with Cult of Personality, one of their bigger tracks, but it opens with this like hard funk rock metal song. It's, you know, you're into it. It's this song with this really sharp social message. And then second song in the best tonal whiplash ever is a cheesy like pop rock ballad where he's like, I wanna know, give me a sign. And it's so fucking goofy. It's an amazing just throttling back and forth between emotions. But some silliness aside, the production here is generally very good. I love the heaviness, the weight to this. A lot of the social messaging is very sharp and quite obviously still relevant to the present day, especially with a track like Open Letter to a Landlord. Oh, geez, I wonder how that's relevant. It does fall into a couple of the typical trappings of this style, in that there's just some stuff on here that's just stupid, and it's there because the band is goofing around, and it's like, can we skip this? Can we cut this out? Also, I'll talk about Go Plastic by Squarepusher, which I listened to recently. As I've kind of been working my way up Squarepusher's, you know, 2000s catalog up to the point I've actually heard, that being Ultra Visitor. I really, it really does strike me just how, I guess, predictable in a sense of an album that Ultra Visitor was from his starting point with records like Feed Me Weird Things and Hard Normal Daddy. Yeah, what's fascinating about Squarepusher is you see every idea that's going on in his mind, and like just the branching pathways that leads to within his individual songs and sounds. And I don't know, he's really just got a super satisfying, cohesive discography to listen to. It should be your main takeaway, that if you want to listen to Squarepusher, listen in order. It's so good because you see the trajectory in such a perfect way. Yeah, and this album has great songs. Like, I mean, just the opener, My Red Hot Car,
classic,
hilarious song that also has just some of the best bass you've ever heard.
Squarepusher just, like, I know that it's kind of his whole thing, but I still feel like Squarepusher doesn't get enough credit for being like a virtuosic bass player. Like, he's just absolutely incredible. And a lot of his like experimental sort of side project stuff, like he formed a band called Shoba Leader One, and like they've got some like live performances on YouTube where they play like Squarepusher songs, and they play original material, and that shit's like, it's just virtuosic electro prog craziness. And it's like, he's just such a, like, he's so tasteless, which is what I really, really appreciate about Squarepusher. Like, I guess the early stuff kind of has some tasteful 90s IDM, you know, general feel to it. But like, as his discography goes on, he kind of starts to care less and less about like what's tasteful and what would, like, you know, make for a conventionally satisfying approach. And he just kind of like he has a really whimsical approach that I think really separates him from a lot of his contemporaries. Like even someone like Aphex Twin, like who's characterized by that sort of like, you know, cheekiness as well. He's like Aphex Twin, but he doesn't have like the commitment to beauty that Aphex Twin often goes back to. Like whereas Squarepusher is just not afraid to just be like really fucking messy and just make songs that are just like really crazy and chaotic. And go,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
probably
for sure.
would agree with the notion, like listen to his records in order. But if you do want to like get a condensed dose, because a lot of them are really long, Go Plastic's a great intro point,
Yeah.
I think, because it's only 45 minutes or so. So it's like a really just nice condensed record to listen to, and it really gives you a
and
taste.
yeah, it's like and Go Plastic's nice in the mid-range where it has those more controlled songs on it, and it also has some of the like weird, just messy walls of noise. So another thing that I've been kind of pushing, but I want to push it now that I'm on here, is the Austin Paraletta album. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Endless Planets is the point. And I've brought this up before. This was passed to me by Ryley, not the Ryley presently in this call, but rather the other Ryley from our Frank Zappa episode on Apostrophe, just for the elucidation of you viewers at home. And this is an avant-garde jazz album. And I guess the first thing you need to know about this is it's on Flying Lotus's record label.
Right,
And
right.
and he did some collabs with Fly Low. So immediately you should have at least somewhat of an idea of what you're getting into with this. But then there's the experience of actually listening to it, where you realize, oh, I didn't know what I was getting into. This is even better. This record's like tone and atmosphere throughout is just consistently great. The pianos, which I believe are Paraletta's primary instrument, some very creative, interesting piano playing throughout that does a ton to contribute to the atmosphere in a way that usually strings or bass would fill out. Just the stylistic texture is so much of the appeal on here, and not just the instruments being used, but how they're being used, where it's these very unconventional but like melodic and still haunting compositions. And really some of the best ways to listen to it are just go for it, because it's only 40 minutes long, and you've got tracks like the Underwater Mountain Odyssey, which are just epic,
Fuck yeah.
multifaceted, these layered pieces. And all of like the big significant songs on here are over 6 minutes each. And there's really only 4, and there's a couple interludes, but those are also really pretty sounding. And then there's track 6, Algiers, which is like the 14-minute opus at the center of this. And Algiers is awesome. Well, even if you don't listen to the rest of the album or don't care, listen to Algiers. That song is mind warping. So I say give it a shot. And it's more modern. This came out in 2011, so it's more modern jazz. So some of you who are maybe not, who want something a little outside of the 60s and 70s with some newer production, perhaps this is also a record for you in that sense. And finally, I will talk about the Dwight Yoakam album, This Time. Dwight Yoakam, what is a neo-traditionalist country artist who came to prominence in the 90s through his reverence for the Bakersfield sound, which was developed by artists like Buck Owens. And his sound is taking from this 60s inspired batch of country and giving it a modern production twist and some really heavier, more rock and pop centric sensibilities in places. I think just the stylistic ambition of This Time is enough to find it interesting, because it really is just him paying very thorough homage to this classic sound in a way that it can come off as unappealing, because this homage also goes much further than just skin deep in terms of aesthetics, but it's also there in the songwriting so naturally you're going to get a bit of that more simplistic meat and potatoes country writing that is maybe not hours of analysis, but rather, oh, you just listen to it once and you get it. So I could see the simplicity of it being a turnoff for some, but I do think the instrumental detail is there. And there's just some classic tracks on here, like 1,000 Miles from Nowhere is something I heard billions of times as a kid. Ain't That Lonely Yet and Fast as You. This record's just full of great songs, except for the ones that aren't so great. But listen to it is my point.
On the note of positive things, let's turn to a not positive thing at all, really. I listened to the new Bloc Party album from
Oh,
this
sorry
year.
about that.
Procrastinated that long enough. Let's wrap it up, fellas. No more of
It's
this.
time to throw in the towel.
What's your take? Is it better or worse than hymns?
Doesn't matter.
This is a
Oh,
I haven't
You
thought
know,
about that
it-
album. I haven't thought about that album all year, but I can
Same.
still remember, like from a review, and specifically from I think the way that August said it. I can still remember Callum is a snake.
Callum is a snake.
That's the only thing I can remember about that album now.
You
And
know, it's
there
like
were
one of
songs
those
I
back-
liked on it, but yeah, they're all gone.
It's like one of those back to basics albums where you're like, oh, this is like coming off of the tour where they were playing Silent Alarm in full, and you can hear that in places, and then there are stark, haunting reminders at every corner that this is, you are not listening to Silent Alarm at all.
how much more will I see the most important things in my life be just gutted, grizzled like an ISIS execution video?
I tell you, it's all been easier after Sear. Like I can stomach it more, but it's that Jason Isbell lyric about alcoholism. It's like it gets easier, but it never gets easy.
You know the funny thing is about Bloc. The funny thing is about Bloc Party now is I think that their weakest element is Callahan now. I think he's the
yeah.
most annoying
Jesus,
thing
yeah.
about the album by far. He's just like
Makes Matty Healy look like fucking WB Yates.
I completely agree with that.
okay, go on, we'll put a pin in that comparison. As for what I've been listening to, it's been a week. I've tried to listen to music that I think would be good. Some of it was, and some of it really wasn't. So it was like a real mixed bag of a week. So let's start with the stuff, just for the sake of it, let's just start with the stuff that was really bad or like not as good. Okay. So a couple of records that I finally checked out that came out about a month ago, but I wanted to catch up on. First of all, the new Bladee album, Spider. I wanted to listen to this because if you may remember, I was a big fan of the record that Bladee and Echo 2K put out together earlier this year, Crest. I still think that album's really good. I think it leans into the best strengths of both artists. So I wanted, especially because Connor still fucking loves basically everything Bladee puts out for whatever reason. And like, that's one of the, everyone.
You dumb motherfucker. How dare you?
Every fucking single person right? No matter how similar to them you are, and how good of a friend, there'll always be some incomprehensible opinion that they have. And that's fascinating, right? Because Connor and I agree on 95% of things. And I feel like I share music taste with Connor maybe more than anyone else. So Connor's fixation on and his drained persona, that fascinates me. Like he gave this new Bladee album an 8 out of 10. So I was like, okay, I want to hear this. And it's just, while I'm listening to it, I feel like I am being put inside the mindset of a fucking groomer, or like not even that, like a fucking teenager who's like has like really, it just makes me feel yuck, right? It makes me feel like a really yuck.
It fits in with the new Jack Harlow album. What was you called that one? It was something like lo-fi beats to harass women to.
Yeah, this is more like lo-fi beats to look up illegal hentai to. Like that's what this album feels like.
There is no illegal hentai.
I was gonna say I
ridiculous.
I gotta know about this supposed illegal hentai.
Like no, seek help. The other thing I listened to that was really mid was the new Freddie Gibbs album, Soul Sold Separately.
Oh yeah, that happened.
Soul Sold Separately is what it's called, and the S's are all dollar signs because of course they are.
The album cover is god fucking awful.
So he has this thing about rabbits on this album. Like I don't know what his deal is.
Jordan Peele's Us.
He just like keeps referencing rabbits. He calls himself the Space Rabbit. At one point, he says he says there's another song where he talks about having rabbit vision.
This is
rabbit vision.
I don't know what it means. All right.
Why not?
And it's funny because you have songs like that, and then you're like, later on you have songs about like cooking crack on grandma's stove.
I was gonna say it
this
would be
is
like
the
if
most
Pusha T came out with a persona.
Ever.
Like it's just, I make it sound far more interesting than it actually is. Maybe the funniest moment is the song "Lobster Omelette" with Rick Ross, and that's all I need to say about it for you to understand why that's funny. There's a moment, like I got some incredible whiplash because there's a moment on here where fucking Joe Rogan turns up. Thankfully, thankfully, it's just for like 10 seconds and it's a skit. He's not like rapping or whatever.
Oh my god, that would be so awesome.
I wish to God he was rapping.
I would listen to it if he was.
He shows up for this skit, right, where he's like, because the whole like the album has this overarching concept, which is essentially like this is his major label debut, which is kind of crazy, right? Because he's been around for like forever. But this album is his major label debut, and the whole concept that's running through it is like he's been given, like hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever by his label to produce this, and he's basically blowing the money on like going to Vegas and like doing drugs and hookers and all that sort of stuff. And like there's this like repeated skits like intermittently throughout the record where it's like someone's trying to get a hold of Freddie, like, Freddie, where the fuck are you? Like trying to like figure out like ways
where my motherfucking dominoes at?
Ways shirking his obligations. So anyway, it's a Joe Rogan turns out. It's like, yo, Freddie, I got some DMT, I got hookers, or whatever he fucking says. He says something about offering him DMT or whatever. So it's like, it's Joe Rogan being Joe Rogan. But anyway, it's a fucking random ass album. It's boring as hell. I didn't like it.
Is there like any other like modern artist other than Freddie Gibbs that has like such a vast disparity between their best stuff and anything that isn't that? It's like his two albums with Madlib. Like I know you can't work with Madlib on every single album, but you drop two bona fide classics. You drop one of the best hip hop albums of the decade, and then like essentially a sequel to it that's almost as good. And then the rest of your career, everybody's just like,
those albums are good because Madlib's a great producer and because Freddie is very good at rapping, right? So when Freddie doesn't want to focus on being very good at rapping and he wants to focus on being an artist or whatever, that's when he really starts to not be good. So that's that. Like, I don't really care for Freddie that much. I say Pinata's a really great album. Everything else is either very good or just not really for me. So I'm never going to be the target audience for Freddie exactly. I think he's more entertaining on Twitter than he is on his albums. But, I'll listen to it if it comes out or whatever. And the worst thing I listened to in a while, actually, new release wise, and this one really hurt, although I can't say I wasn't prepared for it. I knew it was going to be bad because this artist's last album was very fucking bad. And this artist has just been on a tear, essentially kind of shitting all over their legacy. And this, of course, is M.I.A.'s new album, M.I.A. Yeah, so I am a big fan of M.I.A.'s first 4 albums. I think they're all
in the end, it doesn't even matter.
That's good. I like that. I'm a fan of her first 4 albums. I've been on the record about it as well. I think her first 2 albums are great, sort of like infusions of, sort of like grime adjacent, sort of like that kind of cheap, sort of plasticky 2000s lo-fi hip hop production that just focused on being really fucking hard. And then, fleshing that sound out on her second record, and then like completely upending everything and making a kind of noise collage crazy album, and with M.I.A, which ended up kind of predicting hyperpop essentially. And then Matangi, which I thought was a really great sort of like high budget version of something like Carla, where she's kind of leaning into her, most sort of kooky and crazy kind of aspects, but also doing stuff musically that's really sort of like adventurous. And then 2016's AIM came out, and it was like, you could tell. I mean, and to be fair, she's always had massive label drama, and she's always although she's always kind of been really difficult to work with as well. So, I'm not involved enough to assign blame here, but, it's been very clear for a while now that she's lost like most of the passion that she's ever had for making music. And AIM was like galling compared to those first 4 records, because it was like, these are literally demos. Like maybe 2 or 3 of these songs are finished, and it's like, you can't pretend otherwise. It was like the most undercooked garbage. It was a terrible fucking record. And M.I.A is just more of that. It is another terrible, undercooked, fucking garbage fire record that M.I.A has been in the news, like, for being, saying stupid shit essentially, and just pissing people off and being offensive. And what's funny about that is that none of that is in her music, like, at all. It's just the most fucking milquetoast, freedom, and resist, and like, I'm a zoo girl, or whatever she does.
This is
Hey,
this
man.
is sounding like alarmingly similar to the trajectory of Billy Corgan. Like, personally, artistically, it's like the same shit.
It's I guess, like, there's like a song on here called Beep, and like it's a production collaboration between Skrillex and Rick Rubin.
Oh, come on.
That's all you
No,
need
that
to know
sounds
about-
What
awesome.
year is
That's
this?
all you need to know about how this sounds. The song Time Traveler has this dumbest beat that Pharrell has dropped since It's Almost Dry, which wasn't even that long ago. And of course, she returns to work with Diplo, who produced her early stuff. Obviously, like, great records, but obviously someone who, like, they've had a history together. They were in a relationship for a while. Diplo's not exactly in his, most culturally relevant and creatively inspired era either. Like, I'm gonna be real. All of the songs here sound bad. Like they all just sound they're complete clusterfuck. Essentially, the ones that don't sound like a complete clusterfuck are just like, "Ooh, baby."
That is demoralizing to
It's
experience when one of your
it's
favorite interesting artists suddenly becomes fucking boring.
It's awful. It's so bad. And like, it's a thing where it's like the Calais thing, where it's like, the uniqueness of her voice used to be something that was a real appeal, and now it's like the most annoying aspect. It's the same thing with Alpha Games as it is here. Like, M.I.A.'s voice is fucking ear scraping. I cannot stand listening to her.
What was once golden has now turned a shade of gray.
Yeah. Well, it's more like a shade of shit pink, like bloody stool. That's what it is. And it's
more like coital manure.
There's just no need to say certain things.
Yeah, so that's
That was the old heads.
So that's the new M.I.A album that we've been waiting 6 years for. However, on the good side of things, I promised last week that I would listen to the second King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard record, and I have done that. Laminated Denim. It's a nice short one, 30 minutes, only 2 songs. Both are exactly 15 minutes. Again, very much a continuation of the proggy, psyche, jazzy shit they were doing on the other new record they put out that Jake and I are both big fans of. If you like that record, you'll like this. It's really condensed. It's just a jam. It's just really good. Really, really good. I'm
Laminated Denim, is that what it is?
Laminated Denim, yes. And you'll remember it after you hear it, because he says the words laminated denim an awful lot on the album. That's the thing about King Gizzard, is they like often just say the same 2 words a million times.
And I'm just like,
And-
yes, king.
And the two words are, of course, randomly picked, one from the dictionary and one from something they just kind of stumbled upon in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, exactly. Another new record I'll shout out as well. This is also one I had to catch up on from a few weeks ago. New album from Billy Woods, Church. Again,
Oh yeah,
it's another Billy Woods album. You know, Billy Woods has a certain level and a certain standard, and he never compromises on that. So if you like any of his
Hell yeah.
records, you'll like this. It's very good. Of course, it's not as good as Ethiopies, the album he put out earlier this year, but that felt like a kind of
Okay, sure.
masterwork that he was building towards.
Ethiopies.
Is that not how you say it?
I think the E's at the end. I don't think it's Ethiopies. I think it's just Ethiops.
Okay, you don't know that. I will say, particularly the final stretch of 3 songs on this, I think is one of the best runs of music that I've heard on a Billy Woods album. So I highly recommend it for that.
Sick.
It's a 36-minute record. It's just very good, and it's very easy to take in, which is, you know, not something you can always say about Billy. Also, we'll shout out that there is, I listened to a new album from a classic sort of indie folk singer-songwriter, alt-Americana artist that I'm a big fan of, Bill Callahan, formerly known as Smog. He put out a new album called Reality, which is actually spelled like backwards, and so it's Ethel ear, but it's
Little ear?
Oh god.
what have I done? He has said like it's just call it Reality. It's just stylized in reverse. It's another really good Bill Callahan record. I think I would not recommend it as an intro though. It's over an hour long, so it's quite long, and it's very slow paced as well. So it's like a very kind of brooding, but also fairly beautiful and sort of pastoral kind of Americana record. It has a really gorgeous cover art that I really like as well, just a nice oil painting, and I think that it's just very strong. There's a few songs that don't quite land for me, and there are points where I feel it does meander a bit much for its own good. But then you do have songs like Planets and Partition, which is a really kind of jazzy song that I wasn't expecting from him. And First Bird, the opening track that I really enjoyed as well. So if you're a Bill Callahan fan, give that one a listen. And the last thing I'll talk about, the best new listen that I've had that we're not talking about today, is the new album from Niños del Cerro, Suave Pendiente. So Niños del Cerro is a neo-psychedelic, so Chilean artist, neo-psychedelic kind of dream pop, but with like a kind of rockier edge to him as well. He really broke out in 2018 with the album Lance, which I think genuinely is one of the best records of that year. A very tight sort of 50-minute, just sort of proggy psychedelic journey, essentially, where all the songs kind of like just bleed into one massive, just beautiful journey through, like, you know, it's the dream pop equivalent of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, basically, is what that album is.
Hell yeah.
And then the new album, Suave Pendiente, it kind of feels like it's trying to build on that even further, right? So it's about 20 minutes longer for starters, and it definitely, like, it took me a few listens to fully kind of digest it, because it's a lot of music, and a lot of the time the primary vibe is just like, this is very beautiful, or just very kind of compelling, but it kind of takes a little while to kind of have the music itself sort of sink in. And I've been playing a lot of Hollow Knight this week, which is a game I'm currently obsessed with, and I've been listening to this a lot while playing it, and it's just been a really, really great soundtrack to that. And I don't know, I've come to really like, first of all, it was like, I appreciate this. I think this is very much beautiful. His vocals are so remind me of Yonzi from Sigur Rós so much throughout this record. It has such a similar tone. But no, the album is actually fantastic. It took me about 3 or 4 listens to fully come around on the entire thing, especially because of how long it is. But it's such an odyssey. It's such just a journey through this record. Like, you have a great mixture of, like, some of the earlier songs are more kind of compact and sort of 2-3 minute sorts of things, but then the album has a couple of longer tracks in the midsection that sort of you start to feel like it's kind of really blossoming outward, and then it kind of moves towards some quieter songs in the final stretch that I think are really beautiful and tender and work because of the whole aesthetic that the album has built up so far. I just think this record it's quite fantastic, actually. and yeah, I may not be, have as much to say about it as I do about other albums that I think are similarly fantastic from this year. But that's just because like it's kind of difficult to describe, and it's just really sort of a journey. Like I've just always listened to it as one whole record as well. Like I haven't been paying attention to the songs either. So if we were formally reviewing it, of course I would. But it's just been constantly on rotation for me throughout the week, and I've really just enjoyed the really pleasant and beautiful headspace it puts me into. So yeah, I highly recommend that. Obviously, you need to have the patience for a 70-minute neo-psychedelic rock record, but if you do, then I would be really shocked if you didn't find this to be a really rewarding experience. So that brings us to the first review of the day, which is the new album from Wild Pink, I Love You So Much. Wild Pink is an artist that was not on my radar at all until a few months ago. And the reason for that was that they were put on my radar by Stephen Hayden and Ian Cohen of IndieCast, who both, those guys have similar but kind of very distinct tastes in music. So there's a lot of stuff that one of them likes that the other one doesn't really like, and a kind of, but they're great at sort of like finding a middle ground in their discussions, and they do a really good job of that. But every so often there are bands where both of them are just kind of like ridiculously effusive in their praise, essentially. And Wild Pink are one of those bands. Like they both love this band. And I listened to their previous album, A Billion Little Lights, which came out in 2021, just last year. I thought that album was really good. I really enjoyed its kind of plaintive Americana vibe. It wasn't something I was in love with, I will say that much. And so I was like, maybe this is just one of those bands where I'm just not really going to get it. And but then they announced a new album, ILYSM, and I was really, my curiosity was piqued because as soon as this was announced, Stephen said that this is one you really want to get on your radar, and Ian said that it's his favorite album of the year. So okay, all right, I'm in. I'm fully locked in. What is this? I listened to the lead single, which is the title track, became very quickly obsessed with that song. I think it's a gorgeous and just massive piece of wonderful, I don't even know how to describe it. It just kind of, it's a sort of simple, sort of synth-laden piano number, essentially, about devotion, about support, that kind of blossoms into this like war on drugs by way of like, I don't know, Radiohead even maybe, sort of like massive central section. And it's got this kind of gorgeous sort of dreamy nocturnal atmosphere to it. And so I was like, okay, this is very different to A Billion Little Lights. It's a lot more kind of loud, at least that midsection is anyway. It's really kind of gripping in a way that record wasn't for me. And then I found out as well that about this record's backstory, about what this record was kind of even going for and why it existed. And that kind of made me even more curious. So last year, this band's frontman, John Ross, was diagnosed with cancer. And I don't even know if he's fully on the other side of that yet or what the situation is there. It's not something that he necessarily chooses to write directly about, like, being in hospital, chemotherapy, all that sort of thing. But there are definitely allusions to it on this record. And maybe more pertinently, the whole album is kind of about the headspace that you get put in when you get news like that, essentially. And when you all of a sudden start to have to kind of piece your life together and prepare for it to end, essentially, and try and figure out, what you want to leave behind, essentially, what you want to do and say to people before you go. And also just kind of a journey into the long sleepless nights and just the environments and atmospheres that John experienced after that diagnosis. It's a frail album, right? And John sounds frail, right? You can tell that he is, he's a very limited performer, and I understand that not being for everyone. He has a style that I definitely understand. It's not exactly, he's definitely influenced by artists like War on Drugs and Springsteen to some extent, but he's like the polar opposite of them in terms of a personality. He's very insular and withdrawn, and he basically whispers the entire album, part of which is out of necessity because of his condition and his health, but also part of which is just part of the aesthetic and the vibe that he chooses to evoke and the performance style he chooses to go for. Because the whole thing is kind of like the whole record, it feels like being awake in the middle of the night, sort of sitting around a table with someone, and you've got to be quiet because there are other people asleep in the house, but you're having this really intimate conversation and you're sort of revealing things about each other to each other, and you're talking your way through, you know, various emotional crises that you've been experiencing. So part of it's kind of like that. And another part of it's kind of like when you're acutely aware of death, right? Of your own impending death, or maybe of the death of other people that are close to you. He talks about his father dying on this record as well. There's like a ghostliness to this album. And it's a weird way to describe it, right? But there's like a presence. There's presences throughout this record where you feel like you are kind of suspended in a space, essentially, and John is kind of like a ghost, that where he almost is already dead, essentially, and he's kind of like giving an overview of his life or his state of being, or whatever it is. It's a really, it can be eerie at certain points, but it's also very intimate as well. It's the kind of album, and it has a kind of intimacy that I think few artists, like I would, I don't know, a lot of artists, I guess, are kind of like, you know, will put it all out there and want to sort of create something like that. But to me, John is able to create an intimacy with the listener that, I mean, I don't feel like I've experienced an intimate connection to someone through music like this, you know, without talking about parasocial shit, because that's not what I mean. But I don't feel like I've intimately connected with someone's emotional state in a record like this, in a new album, for a while. And so in the second song drops, the second single dropped, which is Hold My Hand with Julian Baker, which I loved even more than the more kind of massive, loud sort of title track. This song is just beautiful, sparse, intimate, and just kind of the sentiment as well, like, which is it's a song essentially just kind of begging to be held. It's about begging to be held. It's about begging to not be alone, essentially. And it's like, it's not pleading, it's not desperate, but at the same time, it's like this kind of like steely, certain confidence that he needs someone at this time, you know. And if that can't be you or whoever he's talking to, that's fine. That's your decision on whether you feel comfortable being that. But I do need that. And it's a sentiment that like it really gutted me as a single. And then I think even in the context of the record as well, it's even more hard hitting. I mean, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt either that Julian Baker is on here as well, and she has her own verse, and she's just the perfect complement for this kind of song and the sentiment that's being expressed in the song as well, because her verse is kind of typically about sort of self-loathing and isolation brought on by, you know, not wanting to be alone with yourself, essentially. And yeah, together they're just a gorgeous pairing. And this song is kind of emblematic, I think, more emblematic of the record than the title track is, because it's just really just piano and acoustic guitar, and you have these very sort of somber shuffling drums that are a really great counterpoint. And then of course you have, towards the end, you have a little bit of a slide guitar that comes in as well, and that's kind of a common occurrence across this record. And yeah, and I'll get a little bit more into the subjects of these songs and what it is about them that really got to me, because I can articulate that, I think. But yeah, it's just overall, it's just like this very haunting and emotional journey through like reckoning with mortality. And you know what I like about, what I appreciate and respect about it, is that it's not really a morbid album. It has some morbid moments, right? It has some moments like Hell is Cold, which is essentially like a vision of like a physical embodiment, or like a musical embodiment of a nightmare that John had while he was like, you know, in chemo or on some kind of medication or whatever, that, you know, where he was sort of trapped essentially. And there are moments on this record that feel really claustrophobic, but there's also a lot of moments on this record that just sort of feel like you're lying in a hospital bed and the sun is pouring through a window essentially, and you're kind of just there with yourself and preparing yourself for no longer being there. And it's a really comforting, and it's the kind of record that sort of helps you to come to terms with something, like if I was to be diagnosed with cancer tomorrow or whatever, like, I mean, even if this record hadn't just come out, even if it had come out years ago, I would put this on because it feels like the kind of record that it doesn't tell you, oh, it's all gonna be okay, you're all gonna be fine, but like helps you to come to terms with a difficult truth, whether that's death, grief, whatever it is. And yeah, and maybe it's just where I'm at the moment in my life, but like that kind of album really, really means something. Yeah. Anyway, what do you guys think?
First of all, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head of sort of the vibe of this record, which I think is appropriate of considering that one Mr. Peter Silberman co-produced this and plays some of the instruments on here. So your description of this is a very hospice-like in terms of what it evokes, not necessarily in like relationship, or it's like, this isn't as cold of an album as that, but it definitely evokes the same kind of stateliness, I guess, you would experience while being ill. And I think that like this album draws from so many different sort of musical wells that we're already kind of in the bag for, so it was no surprise that like I took to this and liked it a great deal. And I feel bad just because I have some criticisms, and I feel bad just because like it feels like I'm really kicking this man while he's down. But that said, I mean, I do really broadly really enjoy the record. I think it's pretty broadly terrific, in fact. It's just that there are certain moments, certain choices that do hold me back from fully loving it maybe the way I would want to a project like this, just because all of the signifiers for something of me falling in love with it are here. Like, I think, again, Hold My Hand. Cosign everything Ryley said about that. That's one of the better songs on here. And Julian's great on here, but to me the standout here, other than like just the combination of the drums, the piano, and the melody, it really kind of reminded me of the Mountain Goats, Sunset Tree era kind of stuff, maybe a little bit more dreamy than something like that, but there's still definitely a sort of raw singer-songwritery feel on some of these songs that I feel really shines through and feels very, very palpable. And there's some things like on the opener, Cahooting the Multiverse, which love that title, a song I really like, but it does showcase one limitation that I have with this, and it unfortunately does have to do with John as a performer, in that I don't necessarily mind his like the approach of the mostly whispered style, but they're also mixed a tad close to the mic for my liking, and that definitely creates a sense of intimacy in some tracks, but in other tracks it just kind of feels like it just kind of feels like it upsets the balance of the production just a little bit. But I love, still, there are plenty of moments to love in a song like this where I feel like there's a sort of moment where everything just kind of drops out completely and there's just dead silence for a moment, and then it yields this enormous guitar sound, and it's just beautiful. And I love how he goes about describing things like nature on here, and especially when you combine it with the sort of really nice meditative piano arpeggios. It's just a really pretty start to the album. I think that the sort of vocal presence here, I think, might be my biggest sticking point, because it's like, it's functional, it's not bad, I don't dislike it, but I also don't really like it either. Like it just feels like the actual performance for me, and I get that this is probably a lot of why you might like this, but to me it just sort of feels very one note throughout the record. There are moments where he kind of breaks away from this performance style, but his voice just in general is just not really a standout for me. I kind of have that problem to a greater extent with St. Peter Camry. The instrumental presence of the song, like at the steady drums, the piano, the gorgeous Americana inflected guitars, and even the lyricism here is pretty potent, but it's again, those vocals, they just feel very incidental, kind of for lack of a better term, it's very generic indie guy sounding, and it just feels like it's that element is sort of shackled to the rest of this album like a ball and chain. And it really, really does kind of frustrate me because I do basically love every other element. Like, for example, on Abducted at the Grief Retreat, which is like maybe the best sounding thing on here. I love the bright, bubbly synths, and they sound enormous. They're some of the best sounding synths I've heard on a record this year, point blank, period. And I dig the premise of the song more than any other, and I love the switch up at the end. It's really effective, and it's still just as beautiful as what comes before it. The other song that I don't really love all that much is probably like War on Terror, which is a pretty song, but I kind of find this one to be a bit plotting, structurally speaking. The vocals feel like they're at their least dynamic, so it's just something I'm super into. But Simple Glyphs after that, for example, kind of starts a jauntier paced song that I feel like we really need at this point in the album. I feel like the album, as you know, a holistic record, is paced very well. And it sort of hits its stride here for me. I love that it kind of slows down and speeds up with the tempo throughout. It adds a really nice flavor to the song, especially the acoustic guitar licks at the end that eventually harmonize with like the normal electric guitars. I'm a sucker for that kind of shit. And then there are other songs on here like See You Better, which, I mean, I love the gnarly guitar solo on this. This is the most War on Drugs-ish this sounds. Grass Widow in the Glass Window is basically a primary showcase of how this is at its best when it's at its most ambitious. Every choice here really works. There's a sort of subtle restlessness in the second half, and it's constantly switching things up without once throwing the listener for a loop. And you just kind of melt away into it. It's an incredible song. But the moment on here that I think is the most spellbinding is absolutely Sucking on the Bird Shot. The lead in to this song, the seamless lead in from the song before it, is fantastic on See You Better. But this is like, there's a glorious doomy transition into this song that keeps up this immense feeling of being smothered by this sound. And it's such a bold choice, and it really pays off well. It's like a shoegazy, almost doom metal Americana breakdown, and it suddenly halts for a more stately moment there for a sec. It's great shit. Everything great about the album feels epitomized on this song when it's at its most potent and its most dynamic. And when it picks up again at the end, fucking incredible. It's just a fantastic fucking highlight. And I wish that maybe the other points on the record that I enjoy maybe topped out like this does. It never quite gets there for me, but overall it's a really good experience. And I feel like if you're even remotely interested of anything, you know, the War on Drugs, indie rock, Julian Baker, this kind of world, if this is something you're into, you owe it to yourself to give this a shot.
I'm glad that the parts of this that resonated with you did resonate with you. I definitely expected this would be, you know, obviously something that I would be by far the most passionate about. It is just something that, you know, it demands a lot of you, both like in terms of your attention, but also like emotionally as well. I think John Ross's lyricism, which is maybe my favorite thing about the whole album, which I've kind of already talked about a little bit, it's more evocative than concrete a lot of the time. But it's very, very effective, and I find it quite moving as well. I mean, some of my favorite lyrical moments, just the way that the whole album has a perspective of someone, you know, who is now acutely aware of their mortality, right? Because of the situation that they're going through. And so like every moment of every day, they're more appreciative, or not even necessarily appreciative, but just more, they notice more the tiniest of things in the world around them. And they kind of become fixations, to be honest, like little wee waypoints that they can kind of measure against where they are, and kind of every second you have suddenly becomes much more valuable. So every little thing around you suddenly becomes so much more remarkable. And I think he's really does a really great job of kind of putting you into that perspective, into that headspace as well, which is why, you know, when I listen to the record, like I feel more attuned to both how I'm feeling and how my body is feeling, and how I, you know, but also just everything around me as well. I think that the lyrics in Cahooting Multiverse are really evocative at this. When you go, it's a tragedy. A quiet moment by the maple tree, it's orange light and through the canopy, it's dewy grass in the morning, it's breaking up on the re-entry 40 miles above the sea. burned to crisp in ecstasy. When I go, it's probably nothing. It's chasing joy of discovery, the frothy piss on the city street, stealing sweet from sugary, where the teachers smoke behind the cedar trees, arms up in a V, laughing at the sun like a Malik scene, melt together like snow in a pool, dreaming dreams so sweet they're cruel, vacuum the desert sand for eternity, nothing unforgiving like Sunday morning. So these two little verses where he's describing like how he envisions or like how he pictures the death of someone close to him, and then versus how he pictures his own death, using these really kind of, just startling and kind of imagistic metaphors, right? Or these comparisons, these visual pieces of visual iconography, right? That just give you such a sense like of the emotional undertones of what he's talking about. Like just the idea of like describing death as vacuuming desert sand for eternity, or like falling through the atmosphere and burning up. Like it's just such a stark and startling way of describing this headspace that he's in. Like I've never had to confront my death in any meaningful way. Like I'm just, a normal dude in his 20s who's like, when you become acutely aware of death, you go through all that kind of the mortality phase, all that sort of thing. But, unless you've been really close to it, you don't know. And obviously John knows. And he's just so good at communicating all these different emotions and headspaces that he experiences during this period. St. Peter Camry is a standout for me because, well, first of all, this is like kind of the stillest moment on the album. I think it's kind of haunting. There's a female vocalist who kind of does some slight, very subtle harmonies on the song, and just the little edge that she gives to the delivery of some of the lines, like really just gives me a little bit of a shiver, especially when you get to that refrain of just like, the whole song is just kind of about coming to terms with how things never work out the way that you want them to. And you think, okay, the song is going to essentially be a message about like, never mind, you just kind of have to keep persevering. But he kind of twists that into saying like, no, run away, burn it all down, like just avoid all your problems. And it's really, God, it hurts, man. It hurts, and it hurts how real it is. And just this idea of feeling as though that point I'm sure you must experience when you go through what he's gone through, where there's just a moment, there's impulsive moments where you just want to kind of get in the car and just sort of drive away from it all and feel like desert wind and just drive and drive and drive until you can't anymore. And that's really, really effective. And I think it goes into Abducted at the Grief Retreat really, really well as well, where it's kind of like, that's almost like a bipolar shift, right? So it comes back, he talks about being blissful in a free fall and floating perfectly and not wanting to come back down. Being in this kind of like dream state, essentially, you probably like on some kind of painkiller or something or maybe he's in the hospital, which I think he could be in the hospital because grief retreat sounds like a very John Ross way of describing a hospital. The song actually, now that I think about it in real time, Abducted at the Grief Retreat is probably about like being in hospital and kind of being on painkillers or whatever, and sort of having a vision essentially of an angel, which he describes in the song, and kind of being picked up and sort of taken away. And then at the end of the song, like though he realizes that this isn't real, he's just begging this, figment of his imagination essentially to stay with him. And that's hard. And then, that idea of the hospital setting is reinforced again by the first line on War on Terror, where he talks about having a hospital bracelet on and a thin gold chain, swimming out to sea. It's hard to explain, not hard to understand. By quitting thinking and swimming away from land, sleep with a white noise machine because this house is too noisy at night. Like he's just the images here and the stark settings and places that he takes you to on almost a line by line basis are, especially like there's often moments where he'll just be on this sort of ramble about like, a childhood image or a setting or something. And then all of a sudden he'll like turn and he'll address someone in the second person, maybe the listener. Did you have that feeling too when you were running and fighting? Technically you died when the shell hit. You were brought back to life by a medic in the basement. That was Sarajevo. It wasn't that long ago. Stay in the ocean because it's just me and the big moon rowing across the sky. Time is always moving to the right and measured in things like tumor markers. Don't you let me sleep in. So he's almost like having a vision of being like in the ocean and seeing his father, I presume, because we get a song later on Sucking on the Birdshot, which is actually essentially about his father, essentially, and about, I am making a presumption here, but I'm pretty sure it's about his father passing away. I mean, the lyrics are very sparse here. You like the main refrain of just come back down, and he's talking about about watching his father go. Like, that's just tough, right? Especially when you've got that, you know, kind of wall of sludge metal guitar essentially just barrowing down on you. And like, it starts off like, you know, in that kind of abstract space, no good sleeping in the bed I make, rare birds mated for life, true love singing fuck the world. And then the next verse, it's like so literal. You were alone when mum said bye on the phone. You were a lone wolf out in the Rockies, way up there, way up high. You slowed down. And then that, you know, guitar comes back in again, come back down. Like, shit, dude. And then it's like the album kind of, it's like all through all of these, you know, dreams and visions and, you know, like woozy states of mind, there's like clarity in The Grass Widow and The Glass Window, right? This song is like, I think, with the one where the sentiment is the most like unambiguous, and just kind of like, he almost kind of addresses you or kind of leaves you with a kind of message that feels like really potent and powerful coming at this point on the record, right? We all try to keep our loved ones calm when they're a dog that heard thunder shaking in a crate. So let me live. Just don't let me live here alone with this miserable guy. That's just such a moment that really gets me. Great big dead elm, standing up broken, a barkless shell. Now is not for the faint of heart. They'll put you on a shelf if you can't just shut the fuck up and be alone with yourself. I can't even unpack that. It just is what it is. And especially with how like musically kind of sophisticated this song is compared to some of the more simpler tracks that we've had up to this point. Like, there's a lot happening here, melody, counter melody, all that sort of thing. And then the closing track, I Can't Love You More. It's like, you know, it's like the epilogue, essentially. It is, you know, it does have some kind of hospice vibes, to be honest, in the same sense that a hospice has an epilogue, and that also ends with a kind of like very muffled callback to a melody from earlier in the record. Like, this song ends with this kind of like caretaker remix style version of the piano from the title track. And it feels like you're actually dying, like at the end of this record. One other record recently that does that, where it's like the final part of the record is like, it simulates what it's like to fucking die. And that's the end of Deaf Heaven's Infinite Granite in Mombasa, right? The end of that song is about like George watching his grandfather die and trying to convey that, the band trying to convey that through the music. And here at the end of the last song, which is obviously an abbreviation for I Couldn't Love You More, it feels like there's this clarity after, like, the last song is clarity, and this is just kind of like a final sort of goodbye. And the last song was maybe addressing himself, maybe talking to himself and giving himself a lesson that he needed, or maybe someone else in his life that he needed to say goodbye to, and passing on what he'd kind of learned by going through that process. And then this final song, it's kind of like reflecting to the listener, right? This place is totally, completely empty. So I just need to act like the person I want to be, because your thinking creates your reality. I used to feel everything intensely, and I still do sometimes, but honestly, it's only when the mood strikes me. It's strange to move on and still miss things, like the view of the moon from my room, and the sight of you walking away up the avenue, and everything I thought was important, but isn't anymore after the year I went through. Which is just like one of my favorite closing lines on an album ever, I think. Like, just such a final reinforcement of the reality of it all and of everything that this album has put you through. I know this is, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, this is just a me album, and that's cool. And it's, you know, I'm grateful for you two for indulging me and doing this. I don't know, Morgan, you have anything you want to add? I know you're not huge on this, but
I think the album in general sounds very good, like really good. There's a lot of great melodies here. The dissonance between the music and the dude's voice is basically always distracting for me. You just feel like dude should be coming in like Springsteen or Adam Granducio or something. And, you know, he's kind of doing like a almost like a slowcore vocal type of thing.
Mm.
There's no escaping that really, but there are some real high moments. The last track in particular, and Hold My Hand, and I Love You So Much pretty well.
Fair enough. Pleased that you both indulged me. And I'm pleased, Jake, that you got a good deal out of it as well. Even if, that was an element that both of you really struggle with. I appreciate it. Okay, favorite tracks and ratings then for ILYSM. Jake, why don't you go first?
3 favorites for this one gotta be Abducted at the Grief Retreat, The Grass Widow in the Glass Window, my favorite, which is Sucking on the Bird Shot. Impeccable titles on here, truly. Least favorite is probably Hell is Cold, and my rating is a 7.
Alrighty, Morgan.
3 favorites: I Couldn't Love You More, See You Better Now, and Hold My Hand. Least favorite, I mean, St. Peter Camry feels like it goes on a little too long. Yeah, I'll give this a 5.5 out of 10.
All
I
right.
just noticed that the bassist on this album's name is Arden Yonkers.
It's the little things in life, isn't it?
Yes.
My 3 favorite tracks are ILYSM, Sucking on the Bird Shot, and Hold My Hand. I guess. God, it's just no misses. I'm going to give it it's very close between an 8.5 and a 9, but I'm going to be reserved for now and just say 8.5. That gives us an average rating overall of 7.0 for Wild Pink's I Love You So Much. All right, let's move on to our second review of the day, which is, of course, the new album from the 1975, Being Funny in a Foreign Language. One of the things that I found really funny, just thinking like last night, is I was looking at like all our ratings for this on Rate Your Music. I was looking at our track ratings, and it was like at least half of the album we seem to have wildly differing opinions on particular songs, and that just was
I would not have it any other way.
That's actually a rare thing, I think, to like have for that to that extent anyway. So this is going to be a fun one, I think. New album from the 1975, Real Ones Will Remember. This was the second band we ever reviewed on the Jams Tea podcast. In our first ever episode, we reviewed Charlie XCX's How I'm Feeling Now and the 1975's Notes on a Conditional Form. Now, earlier this year, we reviewed the follow-up to that Charlie XCX album, Crash. We reviewed that. And now the 1975 are back with a follow-up to Notes on a Conditional Form, Being Funny in a Foreign Language. So it's time to review that. All right, so it's fair to say that this band comes with somewhat of a loaded history for the members of this podcast. We all come from varying spheres of enjoyment or relationship with this band. For me, I've been into them ever since I was a teenager, right? And discovered some of their classic songs off of their first album. And then when their second record came out in 2016, I fell head over heels for that. There was like few records I listened to as much in that year as that album. And it was a fucking stacked year. So I was just, that album came out in February of 2016, I think. And that just defined that month to me. It was such that was a big shit thing that I listened to. Long ass album. And look, and with that record, I feel like they really kind of declared their intent to be the world's biggest and most pretentious band. And you know what? It's something for a band to sort of make that declaration very purposefully and very clearly. You have to admire it on some level, especially when it's coming with songs that are as good as a lot of the songs were on that record, right? The 1975 were bringing with them this kind of U2-esque ambition to be the biggest band in the world, but with this kind of postmodern, ironic sense of self-awareness that U2 never had. And so it's kind of like, they're more like, like Coldplay for Gen Z or something. I don't know. But anyway, they came with this very sort of 80s, like really kind of glammy aesthetic. And they were writing really, really sticky, great pop tunes. Every album has at least one of them, as we'll go into, and many albums have many of them. 2018, they leaned even further into that, like, we are the voice of a generation ambitions that they had with A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships, which was much more just lopsided than their ironically much longer album that preceded it. But it had a lot of songs I really enjoyed on it. I'll go to bat for about half of that record. The other half will just, there's some stinkers on that album, don't get me wrong, but there's also some really great bangers on that record too.
Sometimes the stinkers and the bangers are the exact same song. What's the one where he does the Thank You Kanye Very Cool?
Love It If We Made It. That's a banger. That's a banger. That song is
yeah, that's a banger. But like some of those lyrics, I mean, Jesus.
I mean, look, Matty Healy has always had this kind of like, I am gonna be, I'm gonna fucking just do everything. He does everything you have to do. That everyone who wants to be the voice of generation, wants to be one of the world's most important artists, has to do, right? It's very post Kanye West, right? And he's doing that. He does it pretty well, to be fair to him.
He said, I am going to be the left-wing Morrissey.
I don't think there's any arguing that Matty Healy is very good at what he wants to do. The question is what he wants to do something that interests you, right? And okay, so he has big ambitions. He wants to be, one of the defining rock stars, pop stars of his generation, but he also kind of wants to be better than that. And, that comes with a whole host of baggage, and it's a difficult task to truly achieve. And I don't really feel that he's got there, but he's nevertheless very entertaining. And his band are very good at writing, those very, very catchy and chintzy and just generally cool.
Here's what I think. I think they are a good band at writing 1975 songs.
I would agree. I would 100% agree.
They are so dedicated
Undeniable.
to their one singular aesthetic and kind of all the connotations that come with a song being by this band that it feels like a science at this point, especially with the self-titled opener on here, the 1975, which is just so out of the gate with I'm pretty sure it's a sample of All My Friends by, of course, LCD Sound System.
I don't think it's a sample. I think they're just interpolating the thing because they're doing it. It's the same sort of insistent sort of single note piano thing, but it's also got a little bit of a Steve Reich-esque overdub to it as well.
No, and that's what I'm saying. I think the piano might be sampled, but the overdub is original. I'm not certain. Either way, it sounds very similar. Very obviously. This is just the background to the proper song itself.
Which is a classic sort of missive, right? So for clarity, up to this point, every 1975 album, actually, no, not everyone, because their last record didn't do this, but the first three ones opened with a self-titled song that was essentially the same set of lyrics and a different musical mode each time, very short, very much an intro sort of thing. Then their last album decided to throw that away and instead make the self-titled opener a 5-minute missive from Greta Thunberg, which is absolutely unbearable still as an opener to a record. So whatever. But this time they've kind of done away with, it seems like they've permanently abandoned this regular recurring thing that they were doing with this same set of lyrics, which are ironically about getting hit in a car. And now the 1975 still have a self-titled song opening the record, but it's completely different now. It's a completely different thing. It's a completely new thing, right? So it is a much bigger, more sort of spacious, more ambitious, more sort of like outward reaching thing than any of their opening tracks have ever been before. There's a lot more lyrics. It's very Matty Healy. He talks about, it's a big mixed bag of sentiments that occasionally really, really hit, like the I'm sorry if you're living in your 17 line, which is just nice and understated and kind of hard hitting. Although that said, I would like that line a lot more if it were only said once as opposed to beaten into your head at the end of the song, which is just kind of ruins the impact of it, I think. Because the first time I heard that line, I was like, damn, that's like a really good lyric, a really good Matty Healy lyric. And then you get to the end of the song and he's just saying it over and over again. It's like you're sapping the power out of it, dude, right now. But look, there's other things I like in this line. There's a genuinely funny bit about QAnon being like like a not QAnon specifically, but it does mention QAnon, but like how so much of what kind of has poisoned the well in sort of Western culture as a deliberate kind of insidious psyop, basically. And some bloke in the Philippines is on using a VPN to do whatever. I don't know. Like there's this very kind of tongue-in-cheek joke about kind of mass hysteria essentially in the song. And look, it's all there's lots of cringy shit in here as well. Maybe even some of the slightly profound stuff is also slightly cringy, and that's kind of what the 1975 is. It's a lot to process, and it's all happening in the context of an admittedly very amusing All My Friends. I'm going to choose to believe it's a parody because it kind of feels like it's making fun of the like genuine generational profundity that song has. But also at the same time, you know, it's hard to believe they're not also reaching for that profundity in some way as well. But like, here's the thing about this album, right? And here's like, I won't get fully into my thoughts just yet because I don't want to dominate the early discussion because I know we've all got thoughts. But I have significant reservations about this record, and they may not be they may be surprising to some, but I've got a few of them anyway. What's interesting immediately about this record, I don't necessarily mean interesting in the good way, but what's of note is that I would say by far, more than any of their other previous records since the self-titled, this is the least concerned with making a profound statement about humanity. Really goes as far as that first song, and maybe some of the jokey lyrics of part of the band as well, but it really doesn't go anywhere beyond that. What you get on the rest of the record is actually quite lyrically sparse. It's very much like Maddie is kind of trying to peel back all of the layers of irony, all the layers of like, ironically, all the layers of being funny, considering that's in the title, basically, and just trying to make these very straightforward, sort of devotional, classic 80s kitsch love songs, essentially, right? The whole record is just love song after love song after love song after love song. That's what this is, right? And that's very clearly very purposeful. And so that immediately separates this as an album with its own artistic identity from their previous records, which have love songs on them, but are always kind of relating back to something a little bit bigger about who Maddie is, or about celebrity life, or about kind of how poisonous culture can be in America or whatever, in the UK or wherever. It's a lot of it all kind of comes back to those sorts of things. And that's reflected in music that's very eclectic and all over the place, and genre bending, and just kind of schizophrenic, for lack of a better word, in their previous records. Whereas this, it's like very straight down the middle. One aesthetic for most of the record, a couple of things that try something a bit different, but for the most part, it's either, you know, your 80s glam pop songs or your tender acoustic ballads, and that's it. And they're all about being in love, right? So that's the setup for this album, essentially. What do you guys think?
Well, if I can kick off this discussion with a contentious opinion, I suppose. I think the first song on here sucks. By far my least favorite thing on here, in fact. Really the only song I actually would actively deem that I dislike, and it's mostly because of how it's produced. The sparse piano thing is like fine. It's a bit repetitive. I don't really care for it, but it's like a fine idea, I suppose. I kind of like it more in it when it's in the final segment of the song, when it's a little bit more sparse. But when this song just dissolves into noise, it's illegible. I can't make out a single coherent idea on this fucking track. It's like, I don't know if I'm just like, if my ears just don't work or something, but it's like this messy, noisy stop. It's annoying. It would be a little bit more understandable if like the rest of the album were trying to do something like this, but the rest of the album is so jarringly different in how spacey the production is that when there's just so much happening in the middle segment of this song, and they're just jamming into everything. Like it's capital C compressed, and there's so much shit, and I'm just like, what am I even supposed to get from this? Like I don't feel anything here. I don't even feel disoriented. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, and it feels like it wrong foots you from the very start. And if you remember, this is the first album, or this is band, the last album they put out, Notes on a Conditional Form. That was the first album I got to say I hated on this podcast. But paradoxically, even though I dislike this song, thing is that this album, broadly speaking, it's fine. I enjoy it. It's okay. I don't really think it's that good, but it's fine. I have a decent time with it. And that comes down to two things. Number one, the fact that it is, like Ryley said, basically the pretentiousness, which is here, and I'm sure we'll go into it. And there are parts where Matty Healy's doing his Matty Healy thing, but I can overlook it because, like, I'm sure a lot of people are just like, oh, you don't like it because he's annoying. And it's like, I mean, I should be allowed to, but that's not really the case here. Yeah, I mean, like, yes, it's what he does is an annoying shtick.
You don't like this movie because it sucks.
Well, yes, and like, and for a lot of this album, there are moments where it lessens the impact of things that are otherwise good, but it doesn't ruin them. But the greatest asset this album has is that the track list is half the size of the last one, and the runtime is half the amount of minutes.
40.
Instead of 80 minutes, it's 40. And I'm so pleased about that. None of these songs really outstay their welcome. I can enjoy most of them. There's a decent amount of solid pop bangers on here, even though I think that the title track is not very good, just because it's like fucking whatever. And Happiness is like, the synths at the start of this song make me feel like I'm listening to an 80s sitcom theme song, and like, I get it, the fucking hardy har har, post irony, gotta bring back the 80s thing and make it sound kitschy on purpose. Ha 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 ha, I'm so clever. But like, it's just like, I don't really think it works that well here. I love the funky bass line though, that's cool. And I love the saxophone. The instrumental is solid, but I think this song is weirdly kind of hookless. Matty's rambling here is kind of inane. But then, like, there's songs like Looking for Somebody to Love, which I think is fine. It's the first really coherent moment on the album that comes together as like a functional tune. It feels like an avant pop Born in the USA thing that's going on here, and it doesn't really feel disorganized in the way the first song does. These songs all do feel like they're a bit busy for their own good, but never to the point where it feels like it's oversaturated, say for the first song. Then there are some parts, like Part of the Band, where like the music's comparatively understated, which in a vacuum kind of isn't optimal, but compared to what before it this kind of feels refreshing, and it allows you a moment to breathe. But like, and at the start, like, Matty starts mining some like decently palpable emotional stuff, but then at the halfway point just vomits a bunch of post-ironic nonsense that clashes thematically with what the song was doing before. And then even if it wasn't, it's still just annoying. And he's such a tryhard. Like, that's the thing about his like post-ironic shit on this album, is that it's like, whenever he does it, he's doing it deliberately to antagonize and provoke, and he's doing it in the most boring way imaginable. It's like, I'm going to talk about cancel culture. Just like, what fucking year are you in, Matty? Like, I don't care about this. Nobody cares anymore. No one's canceling you. What are you even talking about, you fucking weirdo? Like, it's so silly. And I want desperately to get on board with this a little bit more, because pop music rarely sounds as colorful as this album does at times, and it's rarely as ambitious as this occasionally is. And it's cool, but it again, a lot of these ideas just come across as a little bit incoherent, both emotionally and sonically, and it just makes me kind of shrug in frustration. But then again, then there's something like I'm in Love with You, which is just, it's not adventurous for what they're going for, but it leans back into the things that they've always been good at. Would fit right in on the sophomore album. It's a bit airless, but it's fun. All I Need to Hear, I really love the comfy, loungy sound of this. It's relaxed. It's without being sparse or lazy. Matty uses this as a chance to be a bit more emotional again, and I dig it. There's tasteful string swells that make me think of the most recent Father John Misty album, and the whole fucking vibe feels like the Stranger era of Billy Joel. I like it. It has some unique guitar tones and instrumental choices. Wintering has some choices lyrically that make me laugh. I'm not sure if it's with him or at him, but I am laughing, probably both. Musically, it's nice, but it's bright. Human 2, this is spare and pleasant, but it's a bit too Sam Smith for my liking, frankly. About You is the best thing on this album by far for me. I love this kind of noisy shoegaze pop thing that's happening. This band wear this look well. I wish they'd do it more. There's some good hooks, some good production here that feels big without being nearly as busy as anything on the front half. Love the sax at the end. They managed to meld that instrument into their sound without being all, hey, look at me, I'm so special for this choice that everyone makes now with a saxophone. And When We Are Together is a decent song that has those weird fucking canceled lines in it that just really kind of muddle things up for some reason. But I like the fiddle playing that feels like it's right off of an old Dixie Chicks album. It's a cute song. I just wish that it didn't fuck itself up at the end. This is an incredibly middling album that I am nonetheless very pleased that I even remotely enjoy. It's deeply mediocre, deeply inconsistent, but I can still say that it does not feel like a chore to listen to. So it is a vast improvement over the last album for me in its brazen mediocrity.
Fun fact, the string arrangement, and I think just the general decision to make the song sound the way it does on About You is actually the product of collaborating with one Mr. Warren Ellis. He is the musical collaborator on that song.
So I'm the one with the least history of the 1975, the Holland 1975 here, whatever they call themselves.
I'm gonna call him that from now on.
The front man, the boy in Spain with the burning piano.
There is no way that Matty Healy would not list Jeff Mangum as a lyrical influence. There's just no way that he wouldn't.
Historically never been a fan of this band. This album doesn't change that, but it was a bit of my choice to kind of push and talk about this, so I think I do owe it some little due. Yeah, we've got the opener here, the 1975. What's particular about the song? We mentioned the LCD sound system stuff, and I think just right off the bat, because that part is so stupidly pretentious, that was the moment I was most sold on this album. Quite honestly, the just brazen tastelessness of covering, sampling, whatever you will, whatever the production ends up being for that song, that tastelessness I could kind of get into. So I was really there for that.
This must have been deeply disappointing to you, August, because it sets this up for this tasteless fucking setup, and then what follows is easily their most tasteful album.
Yeah, and that's some of the disappointment for me, that the opening song, it feels like I'm joking, but I'm not. It was my favorite moment on the whole album because it was so... I just had so much immense respect going into it right away. And then, and Jake, you mentioned the Father John Misty album, which is like genuinely a perfect analog for how I feel about this in terms of like, and let's be clear, I like Josh Tillman. I don't like Matty Healy as a songwriter. So that already puts you much lower for me. I know I'm really stunning the world with my revolutionary, unpredictable takes today. I think for me, it's not even all of just like, oh, it's kitschy. It's meant to be kitschy, and I don't care for that because it just sounds bad. Like, I don't even feel that's the lump sum of my production issues here, because while there are individual compositions or ideas that sound all right, like I know you mentioned the strings, Jake. I think the strings on here sound pretty consistently nice. Really what it is for me is a lot of the production here is just so like gutless and just uninteresting. We've gone off on Jack Antonoff before. We've even had some defense of his production before. But what really irks me here is it just, and I feel I figured out the issue with Antonoff's production from my standpoint is that it sounds good in a vacuum. And what I mean by this is it sounds great. Like it sounds just fine if you have on a pair of headphones and you're in like a quiet room and you're really just trying to experience this group just for the vibe. The issue is if you listen to this in any area with any amount of ambient noise, one such area being the entirety of planet Earth, the bass on here just is the lower end of this album is just completely devastated and sounds, I find, pretty kind of just hard to pin down, hard to hear, not particularly listenable. It just sounds really gross and ugly. Once you add in that minor little factor that some humans, not all, have to experience. So maybe that comment about the vacuum of space was right, because that's where these albums are intended to be listened to. We see Tim Curry, this was a long game. He knew what he was doing. He was like, space, space is the place for Jack Antonoff, because we need to send that motherfucker into the sun before he touches another innocent pop star's record. This is going off on a random tangent, so I'm gonna measure it back in here for a sec. Just to say that, yeah, this album is annoying. If you like that, sure. If you don't, okay.
If you like being annoyed.
Well, to be fair to you, August, you did just say that you like when this band is annoying in some instances. So
no, there are instances where
so
like
go fuck yourself.
there are instances where they take it so far that I have to respect it.
yeah, and I would agree.
Yeah. And the issue is that just for me, that like you get the glimmer of that, but then the rest of this album is spinelessly produced with just mediocre, insipid lyrics. I did not enjoy this, no sir, but I enjoyed it more than Notes on a Conditional Form because it was shorter.
August and I were like this.
Morgan, you've been a fan of the 1975 for a while now. What do you think of the new album?
All right, look, here's the deal. I only give a fuck that Matt Healy's lyrics are bad and annoying when the music is boring. Considering that I believe most of the music on this album to be really good, I don't give a fuck what he writes. So now that we have that out of the way, the 1975 are fun again. I don't know. I mean, there were bright spots in every moment, but a lot of the time they've been just sort of morose, irony, malaise. You know, Matt Healy probably watched some Godard films in between I Like It When You Sleep and this album. And, you know, he just sort of adopted the cigarette smoking French ennui.
I think, to be fair, he's never been like that much of a miserablest. Like, I feel like he's always had a sense of humor about what he does. He's never been like very like, I don't think he's been like, you know, full tilt. You know, I'm a miserable fucking Camus-esque, you know, fatalistic, you know, the world is a shit person. But I get what you're saying.
The point is that the music started to sound that way in a lot of cases. And it just, you know, it's not what I am coming to this band for. I am coming to this band for songs that sound like Looking for Somebody to Love, where it's just you want to bounce up and down a little bit and get on the...
You want to do a little jig?
A little booty in it.
There's a little, it's just fucking get down. And it slaps. And
Get
I don't-
down.
Get to the chopper.
You want to shake your ass to the 1975.
Does anybody else smell toast? Like burning toast.
I think Morgan's greater point about Matty Healy's change is that before he was Reddit annoying, and on this album he's Tumblr annoying, which, at least by my measure, is much better.
I'll put it like this. It's the last two albums were Reddit annoying, and this is Reddit porn annoying. It's just no substance. But there's some good stuff there. Cut that.
Please don't. That's the funniest thing you've said in a long time.
I think that's no, again, I'm not trying to talk you down here or anything, but that is probably one of the most cutting and insightful pieces of criticism you've delivered on the show in a while.
When you quote tweet this,
I know exactly what you mean
to promote it. You need to just say in which Morgan compares the 1975 to Reddit porn.
Absolutely, 100%. All right. So here's what I think.
Let's hear it.
I think this is the worst 1975 album, and I'm going to hopefully try and explain why in a way that's coherent. It certainly comes back to, what you go to this band for, all that sort of thing. So what I like about the 1975 is an impossible sentence to answer a lot of the time. Like, because I love their full-throated, just completely leaning into it, throwback 80s jams. I think they're really good at that. I think they've done that really, really well over the years. One of the things issues I had with Notes on a Conditional Form, though, is whenever they got around to doing that, like that one song, If You're Too Shy, Then Let Me Know, it was like, okay, yeah, this is like, it's better than the noodly, weird electro stuff and the just frankly regrettable alt country shit on that album. But also at the same time, like, you've written this song before and you've done it better. And I'm just like, I definitely had enough of what the other shit you were doing at that point on that album. But for some reason, this isn't satisfying either. That was the thing about that record, right? Is that the longer it went on, the less satisfying it even was when they were doing things they were good at. Because it was just like fatiguing and it was just like autopilot the whole time, right? But that album did still have songs that I like on it. Me and You Together song, I think, is still really great. Frail State of Mind, I think, is really good. People, I think, is still really good. That one song with Phoebe Bridgers, I still like. And a couple of songs on the back half, I think, are pretty good too, still, on that last album. And look, there are two songs on this that I think are great. About You, which, I co-sign everything Jake said about that. Fantastic song, just gorgeous, guitar tones, real swirling production that I do think works for it. And I also really like Happiness, which I haven't seen really much love for, and I get it, but I do really love that song. I think that's a really great execution.
I mean, it's their best single since, certainly since like 2016. I just thought that kind of went without saying.
Yeah.
No, I think it's really great. I really enjoy it. I think that it sounds fulsome. And the rest of this record is the 1975 on autopilot, and it's boring, and I don't enjoy it. The thing about this band is that while I understand and appreciate that what they do well is something that is very pastiche, right? And it's rooted in like the past, and it's rooted in like, throwbacks and shit. I like when this band bring their own spin to that. I like when this band brings some sense of personality to it, right? And my biggest issue with this album is that it does not ever have a personality at any point. The songs that are the least offensive, songs like Oh Caroline and I'm in Love with You, all that sort of thing, All I Need to Hear, they're vacuous. They're just completely lacking anything. Like, I'm in love with
all of my preferred tracks on the album.
No, and I get it. Jake, I really get that, because you hate Matty Healy's personality and his attempts at personality so much, right? So I can understand when those are completely gone, that's when the record's at its most bearable. But to me, that's like when the record's at its most pitiful, because it's like you've kind of, what you've done here is you've either listened to your critics, or you've just made an active decision to strip away so much of what made your music unique, you know, or stand out from the millions of other bands doing this kind of pastiche shit. And instead you've just reverted to what it sounds like just anyone could write these songs. And I that's a kind of trivial way of phrasing that critique, but in terms of what I want from the 1975, I want there to be a sense of humor. I want to be, you know, I want to smile, I want to feel the groove, and I want to just have a good time, but also feel like, yes, this is the 1975 at the same time. I think all their best singles in the past, I think Happiness does that pretty well. I think all their best singles in the past have always done that pretty well. They've always given you a sense of Matty Healy's kind of like theatrical sensibility, you know, how much he kind of relishes being a pop star, and how much the kind of sentiments that he sings about kind of mean to him, even as they're corny. Whereas here he just says, I love with you, over and over, and that's the song. Like, and it's like, I don't believe you at all. I don't believe any of this. It feels so rote. It feels like you're kind of like doing, it doesn't feel like, oh, the 1975 are peering back to the pretension and kind of doing some just really sort of straightforward songs so that, you know, people will remember and find them interesting, not interesting, but like find them bearable again. It feels like they're doing a bit of being a normal band. And like Matty's kind of like mocking like the sort of thing that he's doing. Like, it's just so two-dimensional and toothless, even compared to, you know, their other pop songs, which have never been like, you know, meals that have been full of fiber or anything, but they have been songs that I've wanted to come back to again and again and again, and that have really stuck with me, and where I get a sense of an actual personality and an actual human being behind them, even if that human being has tendencies and aspects to his personality that I don't always vibe with, but I get a real sense that there's a real person there. You know, some of their best songs, like Sex, for instance, off of the debut album, like you know, She's American, or The Sound, or some of those songs off of the second record, where it's like, yeah, they're just focused on being like these, you know, 80s bangers, but you do get a sense of personality that comes with them, and some lyrics that are genuinely funny at times. You know, Give Yourself a Try and Love It If We Made It, and that one song, I'm Not Living If It's Not With You, off of their third album. I thought all those songs do that really, really well. And yeah, and here it's just like, there's no attempt at all to make anything that has any remarkability to it whatsoever, or any kind of lasting impact, again, outside of those two songs that I like. You know, and look, I don't hate anything on here outright. I do think that Wintering kind of doesn't really work. I think the closing track is just, I've listened to this album 5 times. Every single time the closing track's finished, it's gone from him, just completely gone. I don't think that Matty does acoustic ballads very well at all. I don't care for All I Need to Hear either, for that reason as well. It just feels really rote, and it feels like he's deliberately trying to do something that doesn't work for him. Same as like Be My Mistake off of their third album, although even that had a bit more of a sense of humor about it, even, and being an acoustic ballad that made it a little bit more, you know, memorable. And then we get to the other thing, that my biggest issue with this album, Jack Antonoff.
Yes, yes.
And look, I know
know it to be true.
I've played devil's advocate with Jack Antonoff before. I have, you know what? And I did that because
the dark side.
I did that because, you know, part of me, you know, kind of got what he was going for and understood like how he was channeling his influences into trying to give new pop music a distinctly kind of older sound. And I could kind of respect that a little bit. And also part of me was being devil's advocate because, you know, I like playing that role sometimes when everyone else hates something. But like, even if you were all just completely ragging on Jack Antonoff ridiculously, which you're not, you know, there's some legitimate critiques here, but no one here is being like really hateful or anything about what he's doing here. Even if you were, though, I still couldn't play devil's advocate, because I genuinely, and I know this is probably going to sound over the top, I genuinely find most of the way this record is to be produced, mixed, recorded, to be genuinely fucking irritating. All right. It's the most egregious example as part of the band. All right.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Now, this goes back to a particular sound that was kind of pioneered by Rostam Batmanglish of Vampire Weekend, where it's this kind of like, it's the string sound that's
Batman?
very, Yes, his name. He has Batman in his name.
Wait, really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Anyway, he, as the producer and kind of like Johnny Greenwood figure of that band, he kind of pioneered a sound where you did incorporate strings and they have this kind of like hollowness to them, right? And, you know, sometimes that worked in that band, sometimes it didn't. Jack Antonoff has taken that string sound here on part of the band and he's like amped up the hollowness, the kind of just the stringiness to it, you know what I mean? Like the sound of wood, you know, and it's just this really brittle sound that he has to the strings. Also, his drum sounds as well are just really earless, right? Like Jack Antonoff loves to make music sound completely like a fucking mannequin, right? Like if Sean Everett is a human being, if Sean Everett's music production style is like a full-blooded human being, then Jack Antonoff's is a mannequin. It is like a fucking stuffed duck, right? It is like it's a, what's the fucking taxidermy? That's it. It's a taxidermied album. That's what this is. This is a taxidermied album. That's the fucking pull quote. There is no blood, there's no organs, there's no tissue, there's nothing. And even if I could enjoy these hollow, you know, very 1975 on autopilot, cheap ass fucking middling songs, even if I could enjoy those for what they are made even more annoying to me by Jack Antonoff's production, which makes it all sound like a sheet of A4 paper, just completely, all the edges sanded off, everything just like, oh, it's just the vocal mixing as well. Every single thing that Jack Antonoff mixes, he does it wrong, or he does it in a way that I don't like anyway. And I seem to not be the only person who thinks this. Maybe it'll be something we revisit when we talk about Midnights. And like, I don't want to be the dude who's like, well, the mixing is just really because of Sour's experience, unfortunately. But like, I'm sorry, it's terrible. It's bad. I hate this kitschy fucking flat ass woody aesthetic. It sounds legitimately like whatever the fucking wooden equivalent of tinny synths is. Like it's whatever the wooden fucking string equivalent of that is. It's just I listen to this and it's like plugging my fucking headphones into a 2x4. It's just nothing. It's completely lifeless. I'm listening to fucking termites is what I'm listening to. I don't like the way that Jack Antonoff produces records, and he seems to be exacerbating these tendencies with each album he makes. It was also true of Solar Power. And you guys remember how much I wanted to like Solar Power. You guys remember how much I was like, I want to see the vision here, but it's like, I'm done. I've had enough. No more am I going to try and see the vision with Jack Antonoff, because he does it the same way every single time now. And it's just not for me. I want to feel, and look, to his credit, and I attribute this as much to Warren Ellis's hymn, About You does sound significantly better than the rest of the record in that regard. Like, mainly because you don't have to have Jack Antonoff doing these really kind of like sparse mixes where you're just having individual elements kind of like, you just both sort of standing in random places in the mix. You just have a wall of sound, right? And that shoegazy wall of sound it obfuscates some of his most egregious tendencies as a producer, I think. So that's one of the other reasons why that is definitely the best track here. And I do still like Happiness. I do think that his tendencies are to make things sound so brittle are, again, at least covered up on songs like Happiness with just how busy and kind of like colorful the song is. Like usually when there's like synthesizers or when there's like real glam sounds happening, that can cover it up to a certain extent. But whenever you're hearing a string part or an isolated vocal or like a particularly audible drum part, it's really bad on Wintering as well, then it's just fucking unlistenable. Now, I've seen a lot of the song that weirdly gets ragged on the most on this album online, at least from what I can see, is Human 2. And look, while I get that, it is a very kind of like just sort of musically dead song. Like it just doesn't really have anything in the tank. I honestly prefer it to the songs that immediately precede it because it at least feels like stylistically it's doing something a little bit different with the kind of more synthetic sound and the slightly R&B tonality to it. It's not very well executed. It could definitely have been worked on some more, but at least okay, I'm awake now again a little bit.
That
Yeah.
song makes you awake?
Like compared to Wintering and All I Need to Hear, yes, it does. I don't know what that says about me, but a little bit. Like I'm in the hypnagogic state, right? And then I'm awake when About You hits, right? And then I'm like back into the land of Nod for When We Are Together or whatever it is. I really think that Notes on a Conditional Form, you know, the few songs I enjoy on that aside, really was kind of like the clarion call. It was like saying, you know, we're the tank is out, you know, and this is just confirmation of that, running on fumes at this point. Like if the 1975 are to sustain themselves, then they need to, again, lean into the things that are most interesting about this record, lean into the About You, right? Lean into the opening track, although I agree with Jake that it's a bit messy and could have been better executed on the whole. Lean into the more unique ideas here and really try to refine those. Because if I want a song like Oh Caroline or I'm in Love with You, I can get it in a much better form on one of their previous records. I don't know why I would choose these versions of it over those. So yeah, this album, the only advantage I guess this album offers is if you're committed to listening to a 1975 album in full, instead of just, you know, going on Spotify or whatever and picking out the best songs, then yeah, you're going to have a better time with this than their last couple. Although I would still say just listen to one of the first two. But anyway, yeah, no more Jack Antonoff. It really bugs me as well because this album was originally, when they started recording it, they were working with BJ Burton, who's a great producer. He produced the last two Low albums. He's worked with a number of like massive artists over the last few years and made some really great adventurous sounding pop records, right? He's a really, really great producer. And apparently like they just weren't able to be compatible and they eventually just decided to move to Jack Antonoff. And it's a real shame because it's just completely neutered them 100%. Like I could enjoy the vapidity of songs like Oh Caroline or I'm in Love with You if they didn't sound like someone mixed them deliberately to decorate a fucking wall with. Like it's just no, enough.
Then I hope this band continues to be boring because I like them better when they are.
And seemingly so do most people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a middle ground. I just want this band to hit this middle ground that they hit on their best stuff. It's between, you know, not being insufferable, but also having enough personality and character to be memorable. There's just a middle ground that they used to be so good at hitting. And they go either too far in one direction or just too far in the lower direction with what they do nowadays. And it's like, it's just, you had the sauce. Anyway,
Yeah.
No matter how differing our opinions get on this, I think it's just as fucking peculiar that this is the album that has by far the highest Rate Your Music rating, which I think is just like,
it's because
sure,
it would be one of the first two if those albums came
Okay.
out during a time where what they were doing was even remotely cool or like in the
Yeah.
interest of people that were the kind of people that use Rate Your Music. Like anyone who says that this album is like substantively better than their first album is on crack. That album has like proper hooks, proper songs, proper diversity, like, and everything is either 4 minutes or less. Like there's nothing.
Those two albums sitting below a 3.0 is like I mean I hate to be an insufferable poptimist, but like come on guys. Like,
it's so
Jesus.
funny, like
Come on, man.
Fucking that first album is a better pop record than like most of the major pop albums of this decade, I would say. Like most of the best pop of the 2010s of last decade, I guess now. Most of the good best pop of the 2010s came from indie artists who were doing pop records. You know, like Carly Rae Jepsen, for instance, who we're going to talk about next week. You know, all those great, you know, fantastic 2010s pop albums. It was so ironic that they very seldom came from artists who were actually at the top of the pile. And it seems like in the 2010s that maybe that might shift potentially because the indie artists are just really bad at doing pop now compared to how good they were at it in the 2010s. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but it feels to me like the big pop names have suddenly figured out, oh, okay, we need to emulate the indie artists of the 2010s to make our pop records better. And then the indie artists are like, oh, we need to emulate the pop artists of the 2010s to make our records more successful. And as a result of that, indie's getting less interesting and pop music is getting more interesting. And the 1975 are going nowhere. favorite tracks and ratings. I'll go first this time. Reverse the order up. My 3 favorite tracks are the first song, the second song, and the second to last song. My least favorite track is Part of the Band, and I give the album a 5 out of 10. Morgan.
Yeah, 3 favorites: About You, Happiness, and Looking for Somebody to Love. Least favorite, I will probably say When We Are Together, because, I probably dislike Part of the Band more, but When We Are Together is such a wet fart to leave this album on.
Our first kiss was in Christmas in the Walmart toy department. It's the opening lyric.
I
of
wouldn't
that
tell
song.
that to people. That's embarrassing.
I mean, thinking about that is like think about that for a moment. It's just like you're seeing
I don't
this
want
person,
to.
you see in this person, and then you kiss them in the Walmart toy department. How long you been dating, Matt?
How long you been in the Walmart toy department? What are you doing there?
Asking the
Too
real
long.
questions.
Yeah, I will give this a 7.5.
My favorite song on here is the 1975. And my least favorite song is Part of the Band. What was that comparison, Jake, you made about that one new Red Hot Chili Peppers song where it just sounded like We Didn't Start the Fire on Ketamine?
Yeah.
This is exactly that, but again. Yeah, that song sucks. I guess I give the album probably a 4. Wasn't good.
3 favorite tracks on here: About You, All I Need to Hear, and Oh Caroline. My least favorite song is the 1975. I give the album a ringing endorsement of a 5.5 out of 10.
Well, hey,
Whoa.
which gives us an average rating overall of 5.5 for the 1975's being funny in a foreign language. All right, let us know at home what you think of either of the albums we've discussed today. Wild Pink's I Love You So Much, or the 1975's being funny in a foreign language. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your takes, capital T takes, in the comments below. Maddie Healy, if you're listening, love ya. Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Plus, if you want to support us even further and be able to recommend us records to listen to and talk about on the show, you can hit the join button for just $1 a month and your dreams will come true. August, why don't you take us home?
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, SpaceX, Occupy Mars.